bem-vindas de volta. Falar de sustentabilidade em 2022 remete quase sempre para a causa ambiental e, nesse campo, o setor da aviação costuma ser um alvo fácil de atingir. Sabemos que aviões poluem. Por muito que se tente inovar, é difícil reestruturar frotas inteiras, aeroportos e postos de abastecimento de novos combustíveis, muito menos em pouco tempo. Segundo o ambientalista Francisco Ferreira, presidente da Zero, entre 2005 e 2019 o tráfego aéreo europeu cresceu 67% e as emissões de CO2 cresceram 24%. A não ser que sejam tomadas medidas imediatas, as emissões da aviação deverão crescer mais 38% até 2050, mesmo com melhorias na eficiência das aeronaves. Mas se para a grande maioria das companhias aéreas é importante o compromisso ambiental ou atingir o estatuto de carbono neutro, a sustentabilidade do setor também se prende com os elevadíssimos custos associados, quer ao desenvolvimento, à produção, aos processos de operação e à manutenção. Quanto mais combustível for usado, maior é a dependência de fatores externos que influenciam o preço das matérias-primas, como o petróleo. Tornar a aviação sustentável não é apenas o melhor caminho para o planeta, é também a forma de manter muitas companhias operacionais, salvaguardar postos de trabalho e o transporte seguro e rápido de mercadorias e de passageiros. Para moderar o debate sustentabilidade e aviação, passa a palavra a Marília Frias, associada coordenadora da Sociedade de Advogados Vieira de Almeida. Olá, bom dia. Temos uma plateia jovens, um aplauso para vocês, malta. Muito Olá. Bem, falar de sustentabilidade com uma plateia jovem.
É verdade, uma ótima plateia. Bom dia a todos. Fico muito contente por estarmos todos aqui com um tema tão importante. I'll now turn to English because we do have a lot of persons that are seeing this panel, and it's better to reach more people to do it in English. So I'll start to present our marvelous panel, because we do have a wonderful panel to discuss this matter. So the first one from OECD, it's Ruben Maximiano, which is the Senior Competition Expert and Asia Pacific Regional Manager. Ruben, if you please. Then from ICAO, we have Albano Coutinho, which is the member of the Air Navigation Commission. Then we have Ana Vieira da Mata from our Civil Aviation Authority in Portugal. Then from IATA, Ligia Fonseca, which is the Assistant Director Industry of Taxation. And finally, Cesar Sanchez from Airbus is the Vice President of Airbus Southern Europe and Israel. So everyone is introduced now. We'll start our rounds. Thank you all first for accepting our invitation, VDA's invitation. I would start with Ruben. So what kind of public policies does OECD proposes to help the transition to a sustainable aviation?
Okay, thank you very much, Marília. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's a very interesting event and a wonderful panel as well with it. So a quick disclaimer, these are my personal opinions that don't necessarily represent all the views of all the members of the OECD. So having said that and trying to answer to your question, getting the right policies in place is really key to influence the rate at which functioning markets can deliver cheaper, new, efficient, and clean technologies. The truth is that once the state has provided a framework of policies, including subsidies, regulations, and standards, the market can then take over and drive the change that we need. So, if I turn to an example, which is the example of the photovoltaic energy technology, what we have is, which can be actually quite inspirational for aviation, I think, in the sense that recent empirical evidence shows that, whilst fossil fuels have, for the last 140 years, remained relatively stable in terms of costs, with a lot of short-term volatility, of course, the costs of clean tech have actually reduced tremendously. And for decades, the cost of photovoltaics, of batteries, and wind have dropped exponentially at an annual rate of around 10%. so far, and much more can be expected. So the cost of capital for long-term petroleum investments is actually now already much higher than renewables. And that's an important point to raise when you're thinking about the economic incentives that markets will have to take over and start investing. So, you know, what this does is explains the fact that the reason why this happens is because it's based on manufacturing. So photovoltaic, wind, batteries, they're based on manufacturing. And therefore, costs depend on experience and depend on how much you deploy, how much you learn. So the more you learn, the more you reduce costs. So currently in aviation, as we see it, there's a heavy reliance on fossil fuel, and there are three pathways to move towards sustainability. One, you know, the first, technological and operational efficiency by reducing aircraft weight and other improving aerodynamic characteristics, etc. But what we see is that the law of diminishing returns has kicked in. So the rate at which these improvements are coming online is slower. So we cannot rely on these. The second one is breakthrough technologies, such as power to hydrogen technologies that show really a lot of great promise, in particular the green hydrogen, of course. And they have a great potential to reduce emissions. But there's a lot of economic incentives that are challenging, and a lot of technological challenges too. And you know, one of the major challenges relates to the fact that you need to roll out infrastructure that is necessary to fuel such new aircraft, and how willing or able are airports going to be to have more than one sort of fueling system in place. So that, you know, and we need to reduce emissions now, not in 30 years' time. So that brings us to the third pathway, which is this sustainable aviation fuels, SAFs, which can really be key for this decarbonization effort that's needed. Even if, of course, there's some engineering challenges that remain because costs are really too high. And in all of these scenarios, you need public and private funding to ensure a fast rate of cost reduction so that the price signal mechanisms that the market provides can bring in the right incentives for companies to decarbonize. And for that, you need a mix of policies. And just to finish really quickly, you need a mix of policies that are market pull and technology push. And just to highlight three, one is to reduce the price gap between fossil fuels that are being used in aircraft and SAF. And that could be done by including aviation, for instance, in the EU's carbon pricing mechanism. Two is sort of stable targets for decarbonization, providing certainty for the markets, together with technology-neutral subsidies, for instance, to efficient firms that bring new technologies to market, and via open and competitive public tenders, with ongoing adjustments possible to maintain the profit margins to adjust for changes that might actually come in online for what I'm calling dirty tech. So you need to adapt on an ongoing basis. And thirdly, very importantly, you need smart regulation, smart standards. Not just standards that stay, but standards and regulations that are being permanently adapted to the economic incentives so that markets can deliver those changes. And that's why we at the OECD have a motto, which is better policies for better lives, and that's what we propose in this field.
Okay, thank you. Now, Albano from ICAO, so I would like you to speak a little bit on ICAO's role and what has been the industry strategy on this sustainability issue, which is a major issue.
Thank you, Marília. First of all, I'd like to thank you, of course, for inviting me to be here today. It's always a huge pleasure to be here in this marvelous event, which I've accompanied since the first edition. Talking about ICAO, and like my colleague here said, I must state that I am not speaking for ICAO. Actually, my role in ICAO is as an independent expert appointed by Portugal, by ANAC, to be there. But it's probably important at this point maybe to open a parenthesis and talk about what is ICAO, what role ICAO plays in the international aviation. So ICAO is a UN agency, so it's part of the UN system, actually created before the UN, 1944, but it's created by the Chicago Convention, and it's an organization that was formed, and it's today has 193 states as members. And this is important to know because ICAO, with those 193 states, which are
almost
basically
the
covers the whole
world,
planet, ICAO has an assembly, which is its main governance body that meets every 3 years. I mean, me and Anna, we just came back from 2 weeks of very intense work in ICAO in this 41st assembly. And in that assembly, we had 184 of those states who were present, and 57 international organizations like IATA, like all the industry represented there, very important role to play. And in this system that ICAO works, with this assembly every 3 years, in this one, which is actually historical, and it's worth mentioning here that for the first time in the history of ICAO, we had a woman, an African woman, as the president of the assembly, which actually ended up in the last day with everybody standing applause for her performance. But the main outcome of this assembly was precisely the approval of the long-term aspirational goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So this decision made at the ICAO assembly is binded to 193 states around the world. This means that this decision sets the scene for the next decades, and we're talking about 2050, of what needs to be done to make aviation cleaner and to make aviation obviously sustainable. I mean, there's other factors, but at the moment, one of the main issues with aviation that more and more people are concerned, especially young people, more and more think, you know, am I going to fly? Why am I going to fly if this is going to pollute the planet and ruin our future? So this is very important, and at the moment it's probably the #1 concern with the whole aviation community. So this was an historical moment because this decision now binds the 193 states around the world to work towards a cleaner aviation and a cleaner future for us all.
Yes, which is a very important goal. Anna, which is a board member of our Civil Aviation Authority, and well, she has a unique experience that can give us both an international and a national view. So Anna, I would like to ask you if you could elaborate a bit on the public policies surrounding this whole issue of sustainability.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having us. It's very important for the Civil Aviation Authority to be present here and to discuss and reflect upon those issues that are paramount at this time. And just to say hello to my colleagues here in the panel. I was wondering that in the last edition of the Air Summit, we were reflecting upon the recovery of the pandemic, and we were reflecting upon building up better. So the idea of this sector, this dynamic sector, this global sector with a global attendance, 2 years later, we are discussing how to build better. So the better is related to sustainability. We need to be sustainable in environmental terms, in social terms. We need to have a level playing field. So these are paramount issues for the aviation sector and a crucial concern and of the Portuguese Civil Aviation Authority and all of the aviation authorities worldwide. So as Albano mentioned, we had the assembly and the regulation on aviation. Since we are talking about a global sector, the regulation and the framework policies are driven from international views, then on regional blocks on the EU, and then on a national level with the Portuguese Civil Aviation Authority. So the idea is to get all of these people and all of these policies aligned to get a smart regulation and to get to the point. In the assembly, as Albano mentioned, we had a commitment of all the states with a goal along aviation, a long-term aspirational goal to have net zero emissions into 2050. So the idea is, okay, we have now the commitment of all these countries. We have a path of reduction of emissions. That's the way forward. We have to reduce emissions with technology, sustainable aviation fuels, better efficiency, smart regulation, and then we have to, in the meanwhile, offset the emissions that the industry is emitting. So the idea is to have these goals, these compromises of all states on a wider international range. We have the goal, we have the path, and then on a regional block, we have the Green Deal with the EU. So the Green Deal with the EU is aligned with this goal, and has established intermediate goals to get to the point. So we have the Fit for 55 package that sets intermediate goals by 2030 to have a reduction of 55% of emissions. So all of these policies, all of this framework is aligned, and then you have the national authorities that have the mission to implement and to oversee all of those policies and to hear the stakeholders and to foster all of these policies. We have huge challenges ahead of us, but the only way forward is to have an alignment of interests between public authorities, airlines, international organizations, authorities, governments, and passengers. The perception of a passenger regarding air transport is very important when we all need to be aligned with these goals and to set up the regulatory framework in order to get standards, in order to get sustainable aviation, and in order to get a greener flight. So this is how all the framework policy and all the public policies are designed. International level, one layer, regional blocks, second layer, national enforcement. But we need to have all the stakeholders on the civil aviation system together, aligned, in order to walk the path and to achieve the goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we move on to Ligia from IATA, we have an additional speaker which is online. I just wanted to know whether Assunção Cristas was able to connect. I don't know if we can connect to her from the technical team. If not, I will move on and then we will come back to this. Okay, so maybe I'll move on. Ligia Fonseca from IATA, who has an amazing perspective because she has the insight from all, the majority of the airlines, international airlines. Here, I would like to ask you, as you have this position, what has been IATA's role in this sustainability issue, how it has supported the airlines in this new challenge, let's say?
Thank you, Marília. And I'd like to say hi to my fellow panelists. It's really an honor to be in this panel, and the quality of the people that you have here really makes the conversation, the exchange that we need to have very fruitful. So thank you for hosting us. Well, IATA has a unique perspective because we have a global view on what happens in the planet from the airline's perspective. IATA means International Air Transport Association. We represent almost 300 airlines around the world. And I'm explaining this because I see a lot of young people here, students that probably are not familiarized with all these names, so the acronyms, so it's easier for them to follow. We represent the airlines, and from the airline industry, what we heard Albano talk about, the long-term aspirational goal, it's a commitment to be, in 2050, to be net zero. Meaning that the emissions that the airlines produce are compensated, are reduced to the maximum, and then are compensated in the residual percentage, the amount that is not possible to reduce. So this long-term aspirational goal that the states committed to, it's a really significant breakthrough from the states, the countries throughout the world, but the airline industry had already done this. Last year, all the IATA members committed to become net zero by 2050 among themselves. And then we did an amazing work of discussion with the governments around the world to promote this as a best practice and to bring everyone to the same solution. There was no point for the airlines to be committing to this goal without having the involvement of the manufacturers of airplanes, of ICAO, of course, as an international institution, an UN agency. We needed the states to be aligning on this, committing to this, because this will involve all stakeholders to be very aligned. The airlines want to adopt the best practices. They want to have the airframes, the airplanes that are the most efficient. They want to fly the most direct routes that allow them to emit less CO2 because they also spend less fuel. They want to have access to sustainable aviation fuel, which is a new fuel that can be produced, for instance, from waste. The garbage that we produce at home, municipal waste, for instance, can be converted into fuel. And this is amazing and something that probably a few years ago would not be possible. But in the future, we will have several other pathways to produce sustainable aviation fuel, for instance. So everyone, the youngsters that are here in the room or at home, I want them to have this sense of flight pride in the future and to forget about the flight shaming that we have been talking in the past. And the assembly that occurred that ended a few days ago, it's a very positive mark, a milestone of how bright and how sustainable the future can be. And I think the airlines are playing their role in being motivators and triggers of all this discussion and being cooperative with states, with regulators and international agencies to work cooperatively on this. Thank you, Marília.
Finally, Cesar from Airbus. Well, it's also an honor to have you here, considering all the expansion that Airbus has having here in Portugal. I would like to know, how is Airbus tackling this issue? How is it investing in sustainability?
Yes, thank you very much, and a pleasure to be with these distinguished fellow colleagues here in this panel. Actually, this panel, for us in Airbus, is one of the most important partners we could have. And I say that because for many decades, as a pioneer in aerospace, not only in defense, also in aviation, we are investing significantly in this topic. So we started in the beginning of the 20th century. We have some initiatives at the European Union level, like the Clean Sky, etc. From the very beginning, we are a partner there. And we are a significant partner. We represent around 40%, 50% depends on the sector, 60% of the European industry. So we got an important stake there. And this is what we are doing since then, just investing and investing and investing. And when we have to start from zero, we start from zero. And we reinvest again to achieve these targets. So clearly there is no a single response for decarbonization. There's no single response to efficiency in aviation. There are many, many factors, many drivers that can make it possible. So clearly new engines is one key topic. Not only that, new technologies, disruptive technologies is a different topic. Of course, we have what we call the SAF, the Sustainable Aviation Fuel. This is not 100% Airbus topic, of course. We are a partner in this journey to get this sustainable aviation fuel. Of course, on top of that, we have infrastructure, which is also a part of this discussion. And last but not least, we have the regulation, the regulators, the organizations, both public, private, both at the level of mandatory regulations or voluntarily regulations. So altogether, we have a group working on that. This is a corporate group doing that. Also in our divisions, we have 3 divisions. So Airbus Commercial, Airbus Helicopter, Airbus Defence and Space, and the 3 divisions, together with our joint team, we are investing in that target. So for us, it's a key topic, and we cannot do that alone. In the old times, the companies like Airbus, they used to develop many things alone. Today, with sustainability, it's obvious that this is not a stand-alone topic. So because of that, we are developing strong relationships with the airports, with the airlines, with the regulators, and with the whole ecosystem to make it possible. And this is the key message. This is a key priority for us as Pioneer. We are here to make it possible. And you were mentioning before about 2050 as a major target to have zero emissions. For us in Airbus, we try to be a little bit more challenging, and we have this target for 2035. So our target, our internal target, our disclosed target with the world is to have a zero emission aircraft by 2035.
Very good.
We will see, because this is, of course, a target, but we can be a little bit later, a little bit earlier, but the target is there, and this is the important thing. We are committed to achieve this important target.
Very good.
Which is obviously a major challenge. I know we already have Assunção Cristas here. She's VDAs of Counsel. She's the head of ESG Platform, and she's also the head of Environment. Thank you so much for being here. We're doing the panel in English so that it has more reach, but feel free to do it in Portuguese or in English, whatever you feel more comfortable. Considering ESG, so everyone now speaks about, could you just explain a little bit more what you think is going to be the impact on the aviation, and what is this, the ESG, that everyone speaks about now?
ESG. Thank you, Marília. I'm so sorry I'm not able to join you in person, and I was trying to connect myself, but there was a small problem. So I still heard the two last panelists, very inspiring in all these targets they're trying to meet, and this gives us a sense of good expectations for the future. But what I have to say is that we talk about sustainability as a cross-cutting challenge for all the different sectors. And of course, aviation is one very important sector that impacts in our daily lives. So all of us have to be transported somehow by airplanes, and this idea of being proud of using an airplane and being able to reach our destinations and not feeling guilty because we are with that producing a high carbon footprint. I think that is very important. ESG is a framework, it's a regulatory framework. I would say that is the name that we now use for sustainability, but it's not only for sustainability, it's sustainability connected to a legal and a regulatory framework destined to achieve goals in the different areas, environmental areas, social areas, and governance areas. And this is a challenge for all companies. And well, the legislation normally tackles the biggest companies, but we're talking about big companies when we're talking about aviation. So this means that if the companies, if the different players in this sector want to be qualified as sustainable, they have quite some challenges to meet, not only reducing emissions, not only looking at their operations being more effective from an environmental point of view, but also looking at the social part and also at the governance part. So many different topics such as human rights, gender equality, diversity, work-life balance, for example, but also all the other parts relating to governance, anti-bribery, anti-laundering, responsible taxation, for example, are really core issues to guarantee that we tackle all the different areas of sustainability, all the different pillars, and we are able to say that our operation, our activity is really sustainable. So as a good contributor. And of course, there is the law. And from an European perspective, the law is something ongoing. It's a continuous process because we have, for example, European taxonomy regulation approved in 2020, and aviation is not one of the activities covered by the European taxonomy, but one of the possibilities of development of this European taxonomy is to include other activities, namely aviation. One of the conclusions of some reports of the think tank report of the European Parliament was that it would be good to have some activities, for example, aircraft buildings or anything that has to do with production, storage, distribution of fuels, namely sustainable aviation fuels and others, could be qualified within the European taxonomy as sustainable activities. And that would be very helpful to bring more volume of investment to green investment to these realities. This means that there is a lot being made by the sector, also covering the targets of the European Green Deal, the Fit for 55 package, and so on. But there's quite a lot that can be done in the future, namely if we look at the legislation and look at it not only as a mandatory issue, but as something that might inspire and bring some opportunities to address these common goals and to bring good investment for this part. So ESG applies to all the sectors, and even if we feel that in the aviation we have other specific regulations, this kind of cross-cutting frameworks is really important, namely to guarantee that the transition, the decarbonization will be quicker.
Thank you so much. Well, now we had the opportunity to speak with which one of you. Let's go to the second round. So, Ruben, you're also a competition specialist. So what you think are going to be the limits of competition law, and do you think they are so strict that they can even halt this sustainability effort that the industry is doing? What do you think about this?
Yeah, so thank you. I gave the macro view a bit earlier about public policy. I'm going to go a little bit more into the detail of competition policy, which has a big stick as well to play because we have the capacity to fine companies very significantly. So there's a big stick that the competition authorities can use if competition is not respected, let's say. So, but I wanted to start maybe by joining Ligia and Yata in this public sort of, you mentioned hope, and I would say public policy hope is there as well, and I think competition can really play a role in all of that. Indeed. So it can directly play a role in sustainability, essentially in two ways. One, sort of acting on costs, reducing costs, and then acting on demand. So I mentioned earlier this idea that green energy, the costs have been going down very significantly over the last decades, to the point where it's now actually cheaper to deploy than a lot of fossil fuels in other industries, not necessarily this one, but clean energy is fundamental, in particular for the green hydrogen that at some point probably will be one of the drivers. So it's very important that you have that competition driving the deployment and then driving down the cost from learning by doing. So that's the first point. The second point is, which is quite intuitive, is that competition also increases demand, right? So because consumers, as they become more aware, as firstly the technologies are there and are deployed, they become aware, they want to fly green, more green. So competition, so between Airbus and Boeing and others, as well as amongst the airlines, will be on this parameter of competition, because the consumers increasingly will care. They will look to see, how can I fly greener, right? So that will be a second point that will increase this, make this happen. There is a problem though, and the problem is market failure. So, the biggest market failure of all, everyone knows, is environmental emissions. If they're not brought into the costs that currently exists. And that might take time. We've been talking about all the different actors, the ecosystem, as you mentioned, getting together and getting this done, but this takes time.
Of course.
And so one of the ways that companies can try and accelerate all of this without waiting for the right regulation, the smart regulation to be in place, is actually to collaborate. And we know that competition policy can be sometimes an element of some fear. Now, I want to dispel that fear, because I think that it's not a correct fear to have. I mean, sure, there are some instances where green collaboration can actually extend to sort of a cartel behavior, where you're reducing competition in the long term, but that's the key, long term. Competition authorities, they did a great job during the COVID-19 crisis. They looked at the markets as they were, at the market disruptions, supply and demand, and they took those into consideration and allowed collaborations that in many instances beforehand would not have been allowed. I would argue that this is a similar market failure that will require cooperation. However, there are risks. I mean, let me talk about this market failure for a second. So there's two market failures, essentially, that I wanted to speak very quickly about. One is the first mover disadvantage. Okay, so a situation where a company will not invest in the sustainable aviation fuel or green hydrogen for fear of being undercut by rivals. So we know at the moment the price is higher than the fossil fuels for aviation. So you don't want to be the first, because if you have the first, then you're in trouble. Yeah. Consumers will probably go to the one that's cheaper and the less polluting option. So collaboration here to overcome this first mover disadvantage will be important, and competition authorities, I'm sure, and the European Commission has given strong signals on this, will be taken into consideration.
Sorry to interrupt you. We have to speed up a little bit because everyone still has a question to go.
Yes, I'm just finishing here. So,
Thanks.
but there are risks. And so I think the industry needs to be aware of those risks. I mean, one example is the AdBlue case of the European Commission. It fined the players 900 million euros. And they did so because whilst nominally the companies were getting together to improve technology, to decrease the efficiency, to increase the efficiency of fuel use in cars, they were actually had an agreement as well to make sure that deployment of that technology was slowed down, and that is not competition. So care there. Another point of care, and I'll finish here, is an example from the Autorité de Concurrence, the French one, where they fined 300 million euros to a number of companies that had agreed amongst themselves not to publicize their green initiatives. So that also, so it's 300 million euros is a lot for the the floor covering sector, not to advertise environmental performance of products. So I think the competition authorities are ready to accept a lot of collaborations, but still a lot of care needs to be had that competition is there, because competition will play the role of driver of all of this deployment of sustainable green aviation. Thank you.
Thank you. Albano, since we are here still in this international perspective, I'd like to know, what do you think, how do you think it is possible to achieve this net zero emissions by 2050?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that, I mean, this is a fantastic panel to be part of, because we could be here all day talking about this subject, because
there's so much to be said.
Everybody's worried about the planet, and so is aviation. That's why the decision was made. So going back to how ICAO works and what can be done. So I talked about the assembly every 3 years. The decision is made. Everybody went home. Anna came home. I came here to be with you today. But then we have permanent bodies in ICAO that do the day-to-day work of making aviation what it is today. So we have the Council that has 36 member states that were elected again this year for the next 3 years. Worth mentioning that this time Russia was not elected, so I had to say it. And then we have the Air Navigation Commission where I work with 19 people, experts like me from around the planet,
international experts,
working on the evolution of standards. And what we've done in the last 3 years, because we need to feel what the industry is thinking, what the industry is looking in terms of future, to give us an idea of that. So we started having a program called ANC Talks, where every Monday we invite an organization from the industry to come to ICAO and to talk to us about the future. What are they thinking? How do they see aviation evolving? Because we need to know that, to know which way we need to steer the standards and recommended practices of aviation. Right. And this covers everything from aircraft manufacturing, training of pilots.
Basically everything on aviation.
I'm mentioning aircraft manufacturing, aircraft certification. Now, we're talking about the target 2050, okay? 2050 is around the corner.
Yeah, true.
Okay? We have to think of, and this is very important, in 2050, the aircraft, the fleet of the airlines that's going to be flying in 2050 is the fleet that we have today, with the new models that are coming out, the Dreamliners, the 350s, with the engines that we have, the technology that we have today, which has evolved, which continues to evolve. And until 2050, one of the main drivers is going to be definitely sustainable aviation fuels. That's the road, the short, mid-term process that we have to reduce the carbon emissions. And then we're talking about other forms of other forms of propulsion, other types of fuel. We're talking about electrical planes. We're talking about hydrogen as a clean source of. But this is where the offset that we're going to have for the next decades is going to play an important role, which is we need a lot of research and development to continue to evolve these forms of propulsion, these new fuels, so that by 2050, we already we have like Airbus with a project for 2035 to have a new aircraft, a clean aircraft. But then we have the certification process.
Yeah.
So that where it comes the smart law, the more efficient ways of creating standards that then the regulators have to apply. And so that's all this work needs to be faster at ICAO level. So we're looking at also means of streamlining our work to be more efficient, to provide better standards for regulators to apply so that this path, 2050, is achievable. The goal is there. That's where we all want to be. So we also are looking at ways of being more efficient, thinking that we have 193 states and this is a global goal. So I think we know that Europe, United States, we're moving fast, but we need to bring the whole world together because we all need to be there in 2050. So again, as I say, we're trying to also evolve in our way of working inside the organization so that everybody that is sitting here today, or the organizations and companies they represent, can be able to make aviation reach this goal by 2050. Right. So let's keep working and hoping that this is going to happen. Thank you.
Yeah. Anna, from ANAC, what has been ANAC's role in all of this important regulatory perspective? What has ANAC been doing? What ANAC thinks? So, what can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you that this is a key priority for ANAC. So it's one of our strategical pillars on our oversight. ANAC, as I explained previously, and as I think it was everybody heard from all the different speakers, we have to act on different levels. So we have our experts at ICAO in the Committee for Aviation Environmental Protection giving their expertise on how to assess these several challenges that we have. So ANAC looks at international organizations as ICAO, and we have our expertise there in order to find out, in order to have the right drafting of policies. And by doing so, we also have on our views what the stakeholders feel about it, what should be the issues dealt with also. So we act on an international level, as I was explaining, and we do also listen to all the stakeholders and try to understand exactly what should be the policy and what should be the drafting in order to comply with all the goals that we are setting. Also, in our overseeing of the sector, it's important to take into consideration that we take part in joint undertakings. For instance, in the European Union, we have the Clean Aviation joint undertaking, and ANAC has experts on the board of Clean Aviation in order to assess and to give our highlights on how those projects, those investment projects, are being dealt with by all the stakeholders. But this is not only about making policy, this is also about showing what the Portuguese government and showing what Portugal is doing. So we have the role and the task to deploy a state action plan where all the policies, all the projects that are being dealt in EU and also specifically in Portugal to address all these challenges are laid down. This has the advantage to give us a clear sight, a clear vision on how we are, as I was explaining previously, walking this path and walking these challenges. So, in a nutshell, we give expertise on international organizations. We oversee the implementation of this regulatory framework. We are members of boards of joint undertakings in order to deploy our vision of what these investments should be. We are the focal points on ICAO for CORSIA and for the State Action Plan. And we have a key role on capacity building for stakeholders, for aviation authorities that speak Portuguese. So we are embracing these challenges in very different areas, but they all should come together in order to allow the sector, the stakeholders, manufacturers, investors to come together and to fulfill the goal that we all heard of 2050 net zero emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ligia, from IATA side, you can see and you can speak with the airlines and feel their challenges and understand how they feel about all these new requirements and how they intend to achieve. So what you can tell us about the challenges that the airlines are facing towards sustainability?
Well, yes, I can give you a full spectrum of pains that the airlines feel, but let me tell you one thing. The type of interaction the airlines are looking for from regulators is this one that we heard from ANAC right now, from ANAC right now. It's the airlines all around the world not always have a regulator that is this open to have these discussions and to interact with the stakeholders. So if regulators around the world are listening to us, please follow the example of ANAC on the cooperation with the stakeholders. One thing that the airlines fear going forward is that airlines are a very easy target for taxation, for instance. And this is something that I would like to highlight, that every time, and I heard Assunção talking about fair taxing, I heard Ruben talking about smarter regulation. We need to have policies that are targeted to the objective. If the airlines are subject to taxation, we hope that these monies are invested in sustainable aviation or making aviation more sustainable for the future. Let's invest in policies, let's invest in technologies, in airframes, let's invest in sustainable aviation fuel moving forward to make it a bit more cheaper for the airlines to be able to use it. So this is the type of pains that the airlines feel nowadays. We know that the path is long till 2050. It will be painful somehow, but the airlines are so committed. And what I see right now is that the airlines are the most committed ones. They are the front runners in this race towards sustainability because their customers are looking for this. And the passengers, they have a crucial role because they demand the airlines to be greener, to be more sustainable, and the airlines are delivering this. But for that, we have to have this encounter of or balance of policies to enable us to grow in a more sustainable way. Thank you, Marília.
Thank you. Cesar, we already spoke about sustainability and how Airbus wants to achieve it. I assume that there are technological developments that are being studied and developed so that Airbus can achieve this goal. Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Yes, for sure. And I wanted just to come back a little bit to the comments before from Albano and Ruben about the competition. Clearly, for us as a company, as a commercial company, competition is a key driver. And without competition, for sure, we wouldn't be here. So as an example, we have the A320neo. Today is considered a standard in the world of the aviation. It is the best seller we have. And the reason why we launched the A320neo was on the one side, the need of improving the emissions, but also it was a way of competing with Boeing, clearly. And because of this very successful model, we broke the market. We really broke the market, and we brought the competition to a new level of standard. So we trigger a lot of actions in-house, but also in the competition. And after that, I don't want to talk very much about that because we don't have time, but we changed completely the market of that. So this is driven by two things. First of all, because of the need of having a greener aviation, but also the competition, both together. So this is very important for us to understand. Green and greener aviation is an objective, a target in itself, but it cannot go along without the competition. And this is normal in our industry. When we are talking about some specific technologies about decarbonization and efficiency, we have, let's say, 3 or 4 key things that we can say today. We're talking about new aircraft that in the future can bring these advantages. Today, we know that around 80% of the fleets in the world are not latest generation. And when I'm talking about latest generation, I'm not talking about disruptive technologies. I'm talking about available current technologies, but today they are not flying because these technologies are on board, available for around 15-20% of the aircraft in the world. So because of that, this can bring a reduction of an efficiency, improve of efficiency around 20-25% in the future, only with the current technologies. But this is not enough. We know that. We know that, first of all, because the amount of aircraft available in the market, the growth of the market, despite the COVID, because the COVID is a short-term impact, even though it's the strongest in the story of the aviation. But if we look at the long run, and we normally look at the long run, the coming 30 years, for this topic, we will need new batch of technologies, disruptive technologies. So, sustainable aviation fuel is an important topic, as we mentioned before. This is the biggest impact we can today understand about the aviation. So only the new sustainable aviation fuel can represent 50% of the improvements in the future. And this is a topic that, again, cannot be developed only by the aircraft manufacturer. We are a partner, but we need the whole ecosystem to work together. Otherwise, it's not possible to achieve that. We are talking about safety, we are talking about engines, we are talking, of course, about aircraft, but we are talking all the ecosystem around that. So this is an important message. On top of that, disruptive technologies. Disruptive technologies on top of the more efficient technology we have available, it will be, today is let's say a question mark, it's not there, but this is where we are investing most today in the aeronautical world. So we have a line of investigation, what is ZERO-E, so zero emissions. Zero emissions means taking advantage and starting using H2, hydrogen, to fuel the aircraft. In the old times, some years ago, we invested a lot in fuel cells as a future way of powering the aircraft. Today, we do believe that this is not enough. We need to do something else. And something else, it is hydrogen. So the target is to have a zero E aircraft completely powered by hydrogen in 2035. This is a strong target we have today, and this could be one of the ways to achieve this target. On top of that, I don't want to finish that without mentioning the infrastructure and also the operations. The infrastructure could represent 10-15%, so it's not the biggest impact, it still is significant. The operations is also an important topic, and when we talk about operations, we are talking about the ATM, air traffic management. The way we operate today could be improved, and this improvement would bring an additional 10-15% of only because changing the way of operating, of reduction in the consumption, in the fuel. So, and of course the regulator we discussed before. So all these pillars, all together, they could sustain what is our target. We are committed to say that in the future, if we double the aircraft flying in the world every 15 years, so in 15 years we have double number of aircraft flying, we are committed to keep the emissions at the level we have today, if not less. And we are today around 2.3%. Even with double number of aircraft flying in the world, we are committed to maintain this target. And this is a very, very innovative contribution of the aviation to the sustainability world.
Indeed.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all of the panel. It was a great panel. As Albano said, we could be here the entire day because this is a really a hot topic, a very important topic for all of us, for our planet and for this industry. And in the name of Portugal Air Summit and Vieira da Mata, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marília.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well done.